Cool. Thank you, Marco. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. My name is Senthil. I'm a software engineer at eBay. And today we are going to talk about adding AMP to an e-commerce workflow. So basically, you have an organization which has a development workflow, a code base, also a release process, and you want to put AMP into that mixture, and you want to do it very seamlessly. That's the essence of this talk. Although this talk is focused towards e-commerce, a lot of points here apply to web development in general. Okay, before getting started, I want to give some quick background that will set the context for the rest of the talk. So at eBay, we are planning to build a new product browse experience at the same time that AMP was announced. So this was a new and a better experience for users to browse our products. We didn't start the development yet, but the concept of AMP resonated a lot with us. And one of the main reasons is because a lot of traffic to these new product pages are expected from search engines. And we wanted to provide a very good experience for them. If a user is already within eBay, we know where they are going to go next. We can optimize the flows for them. But if they are coming from external platforms like search engines or social media, we don't have a control over there. And that's when we thought that AMP makes a lot of sense. So what we did was, along with regular page development, we thought that we'll also give AMP a shot. So that will be the primary page, which is the page that we are going to develop. And along with it, we will also have an AMP version. We also went ahead and set ourselves some goals on how we want to do this AMP development. Our goal number one was minimum engineering overhead. So I already mentioned there was a team that was ready to work on this new product browse page. So just for doing the AMP development, we will not be having a new team to do it, or we'll be getting new engineers to this team to be doing it. It is the same team that has to deliver the AMP version. One of the main reasons for this is, at that point in time, we didn't know whether AMP would really work for e-commerce. Because it was targeted more towards news and publishing sites, and AMP links were not shown for e-commerce sites in the search results. Our goal two was no deviation in terms of user interface or experience. This was a strict requirement from our product and design team. They already knew that AMP had restrictions, and they said to us that just because of the restrictions, you cannot compromise on user interface or experience. So this was goal number two. And goal number three is analytics should be intact. I'm going to talk a lot about it in the upcoming slides, so you'll hear more. So fast forward today, eBay has close to 16 million AMP-based product browse pages. These are all broad queries. So you can go to Google, type in a query, and then if it qualifies for an AMP, you get that result here. It's pretty fast, it's pretty solid, and users use it on their mobile devices a lot. Yeah. So this is for a query for Canon digital cameras. How did we achieve these goals? So let's see, and that's what the rest of the slides are going to be about. So our first approach towards AMP was this. At the end of the day, AMP is nothing but a bunch of best practices for building web pages. Yes, there is a lot of technology behind it. There is this AMP cache, there is this pre-rendering, and plenty other stuff. But all that is possible because AMP mandates these best practices while building pages. So what we thought was, why don't we incorporate these best practices as a part of the regular development cycle itself? Like not only for the AMP version, but also for the regular version, and also for pages across eBay. So this gives us a more organic approach towards AMP rather than it being a forcing function. And also it makes our other pages fast. We sort of had these things everywhere in eBay, like it was scattered across these best practices. But this exercise helped us to consolidate that list. I'm just highlighting a few here. There were a lot more best practices that we follow, but these are the ones that we immediately put in place. In terms of CSS, we made them size-bound. So the CSS required for the initial rendering of the page should be less than 50 KB. We avoid expensive CSS rules. I know this list keeps changing, but at least we have a list now. We use only GPU-accelerated animations to get the 60 frames per second. In terms of resources, we statically size all resources. So the width and height of an image is always sent declaratively in the markup. We also use the appropriate pre-hints like prefetch, DNS prefetch, and stuff like that. The second thing that helped us to build an AMP version was a principle that we follow in eBay for quite some years. Even before AMP came into play is the lean and accessible principle. We call it the LA principle. And what does lean mean? Lean means that you build and ship only the minimalistic thing required for the initial rendering of the page. This is a very common advice, but it's often overlooked, and people send a lot of unnecessary bytes on the wire. But it also means to us there's another rule that CRP, the critical rendering path, should not depend on scripts. So again, for the initial view, you only need HTML and CSS. You don't need JavaScript for that. And that's what this rule is about. But because of that, we have this flexibility that the scripts, the JavaScripts, can be loaded in an async way. And apparently, AMP also does the same thing. AMP loads the scripts in an async way. So our page loading pattern already matches. This made us very easy to build an AMP version of our page. Under Lean, we also have the component-based approach where we build atomic encapsulated components. To us, a page is nothing but a bunch of components. The components can be granular, the components can be like a composite, which is again granular components, but it's just a container of components. That's what a page is about. And fortunately for us, AMP also follows the same component-based approach where everything in AMP is a bunch of components. It helps us in two things. One is reusability, which is pretty obvious, where we can reuse the components everywhere. But it also makes our application become agnostic of AMP switches. Meaning, let's say you have an image component. The application will just call the image component, and the switch between whether I have to use an AMP image or an image will happen within the component. It's encapsulated inside that. So the application logic becomes very neat and elegant. So it's all encapsulated independent components. So this is the one thing which helped us a lot. Now let's talk about accessibility. At eBay, we take accessibility very seriously. Even the smallest accessibility issue is like a blocker for us. And we are very happy to see even AMP follows a very similar approach. They give a lot of importance to accessibility. And under accessibility, we say that you always start with an accessible markup instead of it being an afterthought. Again, a very common advice, often overlooked. People first, when they get the requirements, they build the markup, and then they start putting accessibility into it. This creates a lot of back and forth between JavaScript, HTML, and CSS. But if you do this, I think it provides a good solution. And AMP also does a very similar thing. They have an accessible markup when they begin. But we also do one more thing. We enforce accessibility through CSS, a technique that we follow in eBay, where the styles get applied only when the right ARIA or accessibility attributes are present. You can read more about it in the link there. And AMP also does a very similar thing. A lot of state mutations, interactions work only if you have the right accessibility attributes. And this made us a natural fit when we start building our pages. We liked it so much that AMP also was following a lot of regular patterns that we have been following. The third thing that helped us in building an AMP version is another principle we have in eBay, which is code with the platform. The platform here being the browser. So over here, as you all know, the browsers have evolved and have become smarter and smarter. So the concept here is try to leverage as much as stuff that comes by default in the browser instead of relying on heavy abstractions or complex libraries. Of course, you can use small libraries, but not heavy abstractions. So under this rule, for this page, we decided that we will not tie up ourselves with any big frameworks, at least for this page. Because this page, if you see, it's more of a browse page, right? As I told you, it's just a page where users come and interact. You don't need a big framework for this page because there is no complex state mutations or any complex interactions or transactions happening here. And since we did this, our markup looks natural, meaning it looks like HTML. It just in a declarative way. And since it looks like HTML, it becomes very easy to replace with AMP markup because AMP markup also looks like HTML. It's all built up custom elements, which is a declarative HTML API. This was a big time saver for us when we were building the AMP version. It was very easy for us to go back and forth. Till now, we have been seeing how to code your application. Next comes the build and release part, where you got to deploy your application to staging, pre-production, production, and all those steps. This is where the minification, bundling, transpiling, and all those stuffs come into play. So what we decided here is that we should have a streamlined build process, meaning that between AMP and non-AMP, there should not be anything drastically different in terms of our build process. We already have a build process in place. Let's use the same build process. The switch of a button thing should happen. And under that, we decided that the tool should handle the difference, meaning there should not be any hand-holding or any manual intervention needed. The tools that we have been previously using should also be used here, which means that the tools should take care of the difference between AMP and non-AMP. For example, inline CSS versus external CSS, no JavaScript versus bundle JavaScript, using the AMP image tag versus the image tag. These are just a handful that I've put here. There are a lot of other things that happen here. Fortunately for us, our assert pipeline tool called Lasso, which is also open source, has conditional dependencies, which are nothing but flags based on runtime context. Usually in build process, we have build time context, but these are flags based on runtime context that when a request comes to us web servers, we know whether this request is an AMP request or a non-AMP request, and the optimizations that I mentioned in the previous slide get applied dynamically. So you don't have to do anything here. It all happens beyond the scene just by setting the flags appropriately. The link provides more details about how we did that. So we did all these things, right? All these things led to less fork in code. By fork, I mean the difference between the fork between the AMP and non-AMP. And in fact, 85% of the code is shared between AMP and non-AMP. This was one of our initial thoughts that we should achieve this, and with this, our goal 1 was achieved, which was minimum engineering overhead. Now let's talk about AMP components. So along with AMP runtime that comes default with AMP, AMP also has this thing called AMP extensions or components. And to our surprise, it's a pretty exhaustive list, even with all the restrictions. It is pretty exhaustive. If you see any common UI pattern out there in the wild, you can see it in this AMP component list. But more importantly for us, it was sufficient to build a fully featured product browse page. Of course, you cannot do a transaction here, you cannot do a checkout here, and that was not our intention anyway. We wanted to build a browse page where users come and interact, and this component list was more than enough. As you can see the difference between our AMP view and our non-AMP view. It more or less looks the same, it also feels the same. You can interact with it, the behavior is very similar. The only difference is there is a text search box at the top in the non-AMP view, which is not there, and even that's getting added in the March release of our AMP version because that component is now available. With this, our goal 2 was achieved, where the user interface should not be changed between an AMP and a non-AMP version. Now let's talk about analytics. I told that keeping analytics intact is one of our goals, and let me explain why. Analytics is super critical for e-commerce. I know it's critical for everyone, but in terms of e-commerce, a lot of our product roadmap, business decisions are all based on the data that we gather from analytics. And it was particularly important for this page because we needed a robust and granular analytics system, meaning we needed to know how users interact with every module in the page. We need to know how they interact, how they did the tap, whether they did swipe, scroll, and all these things that we know. And also, it creates an automatic feedback loop to improvise user experience. Let me explain that. So on the first day of launch, for the watches query, the above the fold had an events module. This is a module that we said that we thought would work out for people who query watches. It shows all the events that are associated with luxury watches. We thought that this is what the users would like when they query the watches module. But what happened in reality is the users, as soon as they came, they scrolled down the page and they went to the deals module, which was below the fold. So obviously our assumption was wrong. But fortunately for us, all this data, this interaction, swipe, scroll, everything goes to our backend system. And our machine learning team uses this data to train our module ranking system. So what happens automatically on the second day is this deals module, which was below the fold, goes above the fold. And it all happens automatically behind the scenes. There is no rollout, nothing associated with it. And this can happen within a day, this can happen over multiple days based on the amount of interactions that the users do. So this was possible in the regular version of the AMP page we did, because this was one of the main things that we wanted to achieve. So how did we do it with the AMP version? And that's where AMP Analytics comes into play. It was already talked about in the earlier sessions too. AMP Analytics gives a pretty exhaustive tracking mechanism. So it is config based, it can do page visibility, horizontal scrolling, vertical scrolling, a couple of stuff. But it was missing one thing. It was missing element level overrides, basically associating tracking data with individual elements in the page. I already mentioned that we needed a very granular tracking, right? We needed tracking at an individual element level. And that was missing here. We could have done it with configs, but that would have not been manageable because there will be configs everywhere in the page and you cannot just keep using that. So as any other good open source citizen, what we did is we filed a GitHub issue, we spec'd and also contributed towards it. And now you can add a data-aware track attribute in any individual element that you want, put all your tracking data inside, and that gets automatically sent to your analytics system. So with this, we are able to achieve the same sort of mechanism that we were doing with our regular pages, even in our AMP pages. But analytics doesn't stop there. Another important thing is session stitching. So in e-commerce world, just a user looking at a product alone is not sufficient. I mean, we are happy they are looking at the product, but we also want them to go ahead, proceed, and do a transaction. And when they do a transaction, we need to attribute the source to where it originally came from. In most of the cases, it will be within eBay. It can be from third-party affiliates, or it can be from AMP. So we need to know what the source is. And this is what session stitching is. But the thing with session stitching is it is very easy when you are on a single domain. For example, you are on eBay.com. You control your domain. You have the cookie. You own the cookie. You control the flow. You know when to set the session, when to update the session, and everything. But it becomes complex when you are dealing with multiple domains. And as you would have guessed, AMP has multiple domains associated with it. So how did we achieve this session stitching in an AMP world? So I will walk through the scenario on how we did that. So when the user first comes to Google search, they click on a link, the AMP view shows up, and it is hosted in ampserianproject.org, which is not a ebay.com domain, right? What we did is we set up a page visibility or page impression tracking on load of the page, which gets fired when the page is visible. And that call goes to an eBay analytics service, which is hosted in pulsar.ebay.com, which is ebay.com domain, right? It calls the URL. It also passes a page ID with them, which is the page of the AMP view. This analytics service now knows that this request came from an AMP view, and this creates a session accordingly, saying, oh, this is a session created by AMP view, and sends back a set cookie header in the response, which has the session details put in along with the domain, which is ebay.com, with the expiry and a lot of other stuff. Now, when a user goes and clicks on any of the link here, they go to a page, the eBay view, which is hosted on ebay.com, which is an eBay domain. And since this previous cookie was set on ebay.com, that cookie gets traveled to this eBay view. And this eBay view calls the analytics service with the same cookie information, and now that system knows clearly that this was a session that originated from AMP, and then it can add more data into this correct session and tie this page view also into it, and it keeps continuing. Was this clear? So when the journey ends, it's pretty much people are aware that, our analytics is aware that the journey originated from AMP. And what happens in a repeat visit? So same thing happens pretty much, but one difference is in the first page impression call, the cookie that was previously set also gets traveled to the Pulsar endpoint, which is an eBay analytics service. And now the analytics service can be smart. It now knows it is the same user, but they have come on a different session or they have come on a different query, so they can do all the mix and matches on how this session works and set the cookie accordingly, and all the remaining things works as such. So this is how our session stitching exercise worked. And with this, our goal 3 was achieved, which was analytics should be intact. Now let's talk about challenges. We have been talking about the good things till now. Of course, there were some challenges. But most of the challenges are now gone, because as the AMP project progressed, a lot of enhancements were made in the project that the challenges we had earlier are now gone. One thing I highlighted is the tracking challenge we had, where we needed a granular tracking. That is sort of fixed now. We needed an input box. We have an input box now. We needed a tab component, and that's there now. One of the reasons is because we were one of the early adapters of AMP, and at that point in time, the component list was not as big as it is today. So today we have a pretty exhaustive list, as I mentioned, so you can pretty much build everything there. Of course, you cannot do a transaction, and when we get to that time, then we will have some restrictions or challenges. But for now, we are good. But there is one thing that I want to highlight. This is common with any big organization, are infrastructure components. So infrastructure components are those critical components that are built by various teams across eBay and get included automatically in your page. And they are really mandatory components. They have to be in your page, like global header footer, site speed beacon kit, experimentation library, security module, and things like this. These all get automatically injected in your page. The applications teams don't even have to code this. The problem is all of them have JavaScript in them, which makes them automatically disqualified for putting them into an AMP version. So this was a big challenge for us. So making them AMP compliant was much more trickier than we thought, because there were a lot of policies restrictions in the company. We got to work with various teams on getting this resolved. So if you are doing this, please consider this. This will result in scope creep and complexity in your development cycle. So if you are new organizations getting started with AMP, I think this is one of the pieces of advice that we would give you that we learned the hard way. There is also a caveat in session stitching, which I mentioned earlier. Safari cookie policy does not allow third-party read and write cookie for first-time users. Meaning, if a user has never visited ebay.com and they go to the Google search results, click on a link, and the AMP view shows up, the page impression calls gets fired. And in the response, I mentioned there is a set cookie header, right? That cookie doesn't get set. So which means when the user clicks on an AMP page and they go to an eBay view, we don't have session data. We think that's a new user just coming from ebay.com. So this would obviously resulted in a lot of high bounce rate, because we were assuming initially that all our users came to AMP and they just went away without even doing a transaction or without coming to eBay and visiting our site. which is obviously a false positive. And honestly, we don't have a good solution for it yet because it's a cookie security policy that Safari enforces. We have a partial solution here, like where we do is we retrieve the referrer traffic from amp-project.org in the same bounce rate interval, and then we subtract it from the bounce rate. This sort of gives us a solution, but you can't always rely on referrer headers because referrer headers is not session. Because the same user can go back and forth. It will be treated as a new user if you just stick to referrer, because referrer doesn't have any other context built into it. So that's why we do not recommend this fully, but this is what we have in hand, and we are going to work more on how to try to resolve this, because all our metrics are sort of skewed now to get that exact information on how the transaction works. Coming to the last part of the thing, so what's next? So we are also planning to build an AMP version for our core product pages. So currently AMP is only for a subset of our product pages. There is a huge other list of product pages where the look and feel is quite different. They are more narrow queries, when you drill down the queries, and so those are the pages that we are looking to build. We are also looking into progressive web apps. It's pretty obvious. This looks like a natural extension for us. Since we already have an AMP, a progressive web app looks natural. This is something that we are also looking to build sometime this year. But what is our ultimate goal? So what's the target that we are setting, right? So at eBay, we want to provide a fast and frictionless commerce web experience irrespective of three things: where the user starts the journey, the underlying operating system or device, or the network conditions. And AMP is just one step towards that. As you know, the web has evolved a lot, and it gives us the power to do these things. We just have to apply it to the whole spectrum, starting from credential management API to payment request web API. I think if you apply it, we will be there pretty soon. Thank you.